Hey guys, and welcome to today's video. In this video, we're going to be creating something similar to what you're seeing on the screen right now. And what we're going to be doing is connecting GitHub to Gatsby. So we're going to be using GitHub as a data source in a Gatsby project. And all we're going to do is list a bunch of our repositories on GitHub, as well as the people who have starred a particular repository, a link to that repository, and also pagination. So we can see we've got page 1, we can go to page 2, and page 3, depending obviously on how many repositories you have in GitHub. So I know this looks pretty crappy, and it's not really necessary to create something good looking for this tutorial. The main thing I want to get across in this tutorial is connecting Gatsby to use GitHub data and just rendering that GitHub data with, of course, pagination. So quickly before we get into the tutorial, I just want to mention that if you're interested in any more in-depth Gatsby tutorials or courses, I currently have 4 different Gatsby courses, and my latest one is Gatsby JS and Shopify, where I'll teach you how to create an e-commerce site using Gatsby and Shopify. So this includes the static Gatsby site, but also things like a dynamic cart and checkout. So all the courses you see here, aside from the bundle, I'm going to leave a link in the description below, which will give you all of these courses for $5 each. So for example, this latest one, the Gatsby and Shopify course, it's just over 6 hours long. So you get over 6 hours worth of content for only $5. So like I said, I'll leave a link in the description below if you're interested in that. And without further ado, let's crack on with this video. So first things first, let's create a new bare bones Gatsby project with Gatsby new, and I'm going to call it Gatsby-GitHub-tutorial. Then once that's finished running, go ahead and open up the project in your IDE, and let's open a new terminal window, and we want to install a package called Gatsby source GraphQL. So let's go npm install gatsby-source-GraphQL. And while that's installing, let's go ahead on over to Gatsby config.js, and in the plugins array, right at the top here, let's create a new entry in the plugins array, and it's going to be an object, and we want to type the resolve key in here. So we want to resolve the Gatsby-source-GraphQL plugin, and we want to pass some options to that plugin. So what we want to do is connect to the GitHub GraphQL API. So one of the options is going to be URL, and for the URL, we need https api.github.com/GraphQL. We need a type name, and this can be anything, and it's just a reference for us to use in our project whenever we refer to this GraphQL schema or type, and we don't actually need to reference it in this tutorial, so it doesn't really matter what we type in here, but let's just type GitHub in there, and then the field name, we can also type anything in here, but I'm just going to type GitHub in there, and I'll explain what this lowercase GitHub refers to when we actually get to it in a second. But for now, let's add the last key to our options, and that is headers. So we need to add an authorization header with a capital A, and this authorization header is going to be equal to capital B in bearer, space, and this is where we put our key that we're going to generate in GitHub. So GitHub knows whenever we query the GraphQL API that we're going to authenticate against the API with that key. So with that said then, let's go ahead and create this key so we can connect to our GitHub API and start querying our repositories. So let's head on over to github.com and go to settings/tokens. Alternatively, you can click on your little icon in the top right here, go to settings in there, and then go to developer settings on the left hand side, and then we want to go down to personal access tokens. Now we need to generate a new token, and we're gonna give it a note something like Gatsby site tutorial, and we want to select some options in here that we want to give this key permission to query. So the only one we really need is the public repo. So select public repo and click generate token, and this will generate a new token for us. And you need to make sure you copy this token here, because like the message says here, this is the only time you're going to be able to see this token. So this is your only chance to copy this token. So make sure you copy the token. we need to head on back to our code and let's create a new file in the root directory, and we want to call it .env. And then we want to add a new environment variable in .env called Gatsby _GitHub _token, and set that equal to the token that we just copied. Then in Gatsby config, let's scroll right to the top here. And at the top, we actually need to create a little bit of setup to be able to use environment variables from our .env file. So at the top here, all we need to do is require .env, and we want to add some config with .config. And in this config, all we need to do is add a key called path and set that equal to .env. So now we have access to environment variables from this .env file. So we now have access to Gatsby _GitHub _token. Now I've actually got a bit of a typo here. We want to remove this Gatsby part, because if we prefix any environment variables with Gatsby _, this will make the environment variables public to the front end. So we don't actually want this key to be accessible from the front end. That's a massive no-no. So we want this only accessible from the server side. So we remove the Gatsby _. So we have just GitHub _token. So then in the Gatsby config, right down in our Gatsby source GraphQL, we want to finish off our authorization header with bearer space and then process.env.github token. And now we should be good to go to actually query some data from GitHub. So let's go ahead and run Gatsby develop. So this will spool up a development server for us. And let's access the graphical tool by going to localhost 8000 __ GraphQL. And this graphical tool will allow us to query our live data from GitHub. So if we take a look in the Explorer window here, we can see we've got GitHub. So this GitHub here is referring to, or it's been set up using this field name GitHub. So if we wanted to rename this to something like chicken butthole, then if we go back to graphical, this, instead of GitHub here, it would say chicken butthole. So we don't actually have to call it GitHub. We can call it anything we want, and that's absolutely fine. Well, it's fine in the sense that we can call it whatever we want. If it gets you fired from your job, then obviously it's not fine. So with that said, I'm going to go back to the code and change this back from chicken butthole back to GitHub. Then let's go back to the graphical tool and query some GitHub data. So we want to select GitHub and viewer. Then we want to scroll all the way down and select repositories. Then we want to select the first, and it will automatically go to 10. So we want to select the first 10 repositories. Owner affiliations, we want to set to owner. So if we scroll across here, we can see owner affiliations is set to owner. So this will filter out any organizations or anything like that that you may be a part of. So it's only the repositories that you've created yourself and you're the owner of that's going to be returned. Then we want to go edges, node, and let's just select, if we scroll all the way down, let's just select name and hit play on that. And this will return the first 10 repositories from GitHub. So if we scroll all the way down again here and select the total count and hit play and scroll down here, we can see the total count is 28. So we're going to need this total count to be able to calculate how many pages we need to generate within Gatsby. So let's go ahead and actually generate those pages. Let's go back to our code and we want to go to Gatsby node. Let's remove these comments. And we want to export.create pages, set that equal to async, and then within here is where we want to query for our GitHub data. So within the async function here, we want to destructure GraphQL and actions. So GraphQL will obviously allow us to call a GraphQL query, and actions contains the actual page or the create page action, which will actually then create that page for us. So first of all, we want the GraphQL query. So we want to go const, and the first GraphQL query we need is to get the total pages. So let's go total pages result, and we want to set that equal to GraphQL. Within these backticks then, we want to create a new GraphQL query. We want to query GitHub, viewer, repositories, and within here we want the first one. We just want the first one for now, because all we're concerned with is the total pages, and we want the owner affiliations set to owner in all capitals. Then we want to return the total count. And actually, because this GraphQL returns a promise, we need to await. So we want to await for this GraphQL promise to resolve and then assign the result to total pages result. So then if we go back to the graphical tool, we can see our total count is 28. So back in the code then, let's assume we have a page size of 10 items per page. So to calculate the number of pages that we need to generate, we just need to go const num pages, set that equal to math.ceil, and within math.ceil we want to pass the total pages result dot data dot github dot viewer dot repositories dot total count, and we just want to divide that by 10. So this will give us the number of pages that we need. So then let's go ahead and create those pages. So we're going to create a for loop and iterate the amount of times that num pages is equal to. So we've got 28 total pages or total count divided by 10, and we're using math.ceil. So obviously 28 divided by 10 is 2.8. With math.ceil, that rounds it up to 3. So we need 3 pages. So obviously the first 2 pages are going to have 10 items each. Then the last page will have the remaining 8 items. So within this for loop then, let's actually create those 3 pages. Let's go let I equals 0. I is less than num pages, I++. Then we want to use the create page action. So right at the top here, let's destructure create page from actions, and then use that create page action then within the for loop. Let's go create page, and we want to pass a path for this new page, and the path is going to be repos / and then the page number. So the page number we can just get by using I+1. Then we need to actually render a component for this particular page. So we need to pass the component key to create page, and that is going to be equal to path.resolve. And we're going to pass a path in here. So it's going to be source / templates / repo template.js. I've got templates there. So repo templates.js. And we need to import path first right at the top here. Above this export, we need to create a const path equals require path. And then we actually need to create the template that we specified here. So in source, in the source directory here, let's create a new folder called templates. Within this templates folder, let's create a new file called repo templates.js. Then in repo template.js, we want to import React from React, and let's create a const repo template. And this is just going to be a really basic React component. We're just going to turn for now a div, and within the div, just a h1 saying repo template, and then export default repo template. So now if we stop running Gatsby and rerun Gatsby develop, then head on over to localhost 8000, and we should be able to go /repos/1, and there we go. Exactly the same /repos/2, as well as 3, and if we go to 4, obviously we don't have a 4th page, so we get presented with the 404 page. And we can see down here as well, all our pages that we actually have available. We can see repos 1, repos 2, repos 3, as well as the home page, the page 2, the 404 page using TypeScript page. So these are all in the pages directory here. And if we go back quickly to Gatsby, we can see these /repos are the ones that we automatically generated in Gatsby Node. So we can see we've got repos / and then we're just using the iterator index here and just adding 1 to it, obviously because I is equal to 0 at the start. So we don't want repos /0, we want repos /1, etc., etc. So from here then, let's actually render some repo data to each of these pages. So we need to add a context property to the create page, and we're going to pass down an end cursor property to the context. So first of all, let's create an end cursor variable. Just above the for loop here, let's go let end cursor, set that equal to null as default. And then in context, we also want to pass down the total pages and just set that equal to num pages. So then the reason we need this end cursor here is because we need to point to a particular cursor or a particular document. And what we want to do is query the first 10 items, so the first 10 repositories after a particular document. So the first 10 are going to be from document 1 to 10, for example. And then for the second page, what we want is the first 10 after document 10. So that will return documents 11 to 20. And then the third and final page, we want the first 10 after document 20. So obviously we don't have 10, we only have 8 there, but it will return those remaining 8 for us. So what the cursor is just a pointer to a particular document. And it allows us to create things like what we're doing now, which is pagination. So that's essentially all a cursor is just a pointer to a document, and we need that to be able to calculate what data we need to get back, what data we want to query for each page. So then let's scroll down to the create page function here, and just underneath the create page function, we want to create a new GraphQL query. So let's go const result, set that equal to await GraphQL, and within here we want to create a new query. We want to go GitHub, viewer, repositories. We want to go first 10. We want to go exactly like before, owner, affiliations, set that equal to all caps owner. And then we want to go after. So we need to add a cursor here, and we're going to set it to the end cursor. So before we add this in, let's quickly go back to the graphical tool. And let me show you what the end cursor actually is. So we can see we've got GitHub, viewer, repositories. And within repositories, we also want to query the page info. And we can see we've got an end cursor here. So first of all, before we run this, let's also query cursor on edges. So let's hit play on this. And we can see in the result window, if we scroll all the way down, we've got page info, end cursor. And you'll notice the last element in the array here. So React Intercom. So the React Intercom repo, this cursor is a pointer to that document, and we can see, because it's the last in the array, the end cursor is also equal to that. So then for page 2, we want to query the first 10 elements after this last element, this end cursor. So this is what I'm referring to, or what our code is referring to, when I mean the end cursor. So let's go back to our code and actually implement this then. We want to have an after here, and we want to interpolate a string and just interpolate the end cursor within here. But we want to first check to see if an end cursor exists, because it's going to be null on the first iteration, because we don't want an end cursor. We want to start from the start for the very first page. We only need an end cursor for all pages after page 1. So we want to check if end cursor. Let's put another set of backticks, and then we want a set of double quotations, and then interpolate within the double quotations, end cursor, and then we just want else. We just want to return null. So then for our actual query here, we just need the page info and the end cursor. So we want to query page info, not into, page info, end cursor. Then we want to use this result. So all the way down here, we want to set the end cursor equal to result.data.github.repositories.pageinfo.endCursor. So we're going to need to rerun Gatsby develop at this point because we've made changes to Gatsby node. So once Gatsby develop has finished, we need to go on over to the repo template. And if we go back to Gatsby node, actually, for the page context for the repo template, we're going to be passing in the end cursor and the total pages. So this is going to be injected as props to the repo template. So we're going to have access to the end cursor and the total pages from within the repo template. But also, because the repo template is a page, we're using it as a page template within Gatsby. Anytime we export a query from a page, it's known as a page query in Gatsby. And also, any context we pass to that page, Gatsby injects into that page query for us any context that we pass down. So it's easier just seeing some code instead of me explaining it. So let's go ahead and first of all, export a const query. So this is our page query, and we want to set it equal to GraphQL, and we have no brackets this time, it's just backticks. So then we need to actually import GraphQL from Gatsby, and we want to create a new query here. Let's go query, repo query, and within this repo query, Gatsby is going to inject for us the end cursor, and it's going to be a string. So that's a string with a capital S. So then exactly like before, we just want to query GitHub, viewer, repositories, and we want the first 10. We want the owner affiliations to be all caps owner, and we want after to be equal to end cursor. So from here we can query any nodes on a particular property. So the nodes we want are name, URL. Let's also query description and the stargazer count. Now this tutorial is getting a little bit long, so I'm not going to bother with any CSS and things like that or rendering the stargazers, but we can render the stargazer count because that's a really easy thing to do. So in the repo template then, in props, anytime we export a query or a page query from a page template in Gatsby, Gatsby automatically injects the result into our props. So let's console log those props and let's take a look in the browser to see what those props look like. So for repos and page 3, let's take a look in our console and we can see we've got an object console logged here. Let me zoom in a bit. We can see we've got data, GitHub, viewer, repositories, nodes, and we've got 8 nodes. So we've got 8 elements being returned because we're on page 3. So remember, the first 2 pages are going to contain 10 elements, and the last page, because we've got 28 repositories in total, the last page is going to return 8, or the remaining 8. And there we go. If we open up these nodes, open up a particular object, we can see we've got description. A lot of my repos don't actually have a description, so the description is going to be null, but we've got a name, we've got the stargazer count and the URL. So let's go ahead and quickly render each of those. Instead of the repo template, let's loop through props.data.github.viewer.repositories.nodes.map. So for each node, let's return a h1, and within the h1, let's return an anchor tag and set the href equal to node.url. And for the anchor text, let's have node.name. So this URL and name are referring to the URL and name here. Then let's have a target equals underscore blank there. Let's remove the repo template h1 and let's actually wrap this h1 in a div. So let's move all of that into that div there. We need a key prop because we're rendering from an array in React. So we want to set that equal to node.id. And then we actually need to query for that ID in the nodes. So let's go ID there as well. So then underneath this h1, let's have a p tag. Let's render an emoji. Let's go star, use that little stars in the eyes there, and go stargazers. And let's just render within some brackets there the node.stargazer count. And underneath here, just another p tag and render the node.description. So let's take a look in the browser to see what that looks like. And there we go. We've got our stargazers. Have I got any? I've got a description here for the bottom sheet repo, and that's all for the page 3. So if we go to page 2, we can see we've got all our repos from page 2. For the plurality gen, I've got a description there. So yeah, we can see we're returning our data. So the very last thing I want to do then is hook up some pagination so we can navigate between each page without having to change the URL at the top here manually. So let's go back to our code. First of all, let's import the default layout from Gatsby just so it looks a little bit nicer. Let's import layout from ../components/layout. And instead of this root div here, let's render that layout component. And right at the top then, we want to import the link component from Gatsby. So this is a really cool component which we can use to link to internal pages within our site. So we've got the anchor tag here because the GitHub URL is not an internal page of our site. So we use the anchor tag there. But if we want to link to internal pages, we just use the link component. So underneath our rendering of the repositories, let's render a div. And within this div, we want to create an array. So we want an array.from, pass in an object. So we want the length to be equal to props.pageContext.numPages. So first of all, let's take a look in the browser, and in the console log, we can see this is our props that we're console logging here in the repo template. So we can see we've got a page context, we've got the end cursor, and the total pages. So this comes from Gatsby Node. Just to quickly remind you, Gatsby Node in here, in the create page action, the context, we're passing down the end cursor and the total pages. So in the repo template then, we have access to the end cursor and the total pages. I've accidentally put num pages here, so this should be total pages because it refers to whatever we pass into the context here. So we've got total pages. So we've got array.from, props page context, total pages. Then we want to go .map. So let's go p and I in there. We just need to use the iterator. So then we want to return a div. Let's go key, set that equal to I. And within the div, let's render that link component. And for the text, let's just render I plus 1. And the link is going to be 2. We want to set that equal to /repos/I plus 1. Let's save that. It's not going to look very good, but let's take a look in the browser anyway. And right at the bottom here, we've got our page numbers. Let's click on page 1. We can see we get navigated to page 1. Let's click on page 2. We go to page 2. And finally, page 3, we go to page 3. So this ended up being a pretty long tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Obviously, it doesn't look that good. It actually looks really ugly. I know that. But I just wanted to show you how we can query our GitHub repositories within Gatsby. So this would be a really cool scenario, or an ideal scenario to use this is part of portfolios. So if you've got a portfolio website, for example, in the Gatsby and WordPress course, I teach you how to create a portfolio with WordPress as a backend. So this would be a perfect supplementary section to that portfolio site. So you've got all your portfolio items, but then you've got this second portfolio section which contains all your code repositories. So really ideal if you're a web developer and you want to show off your code and your repositories as part of your portfolio. Remember, there's links in the description below where you can get all of my courses for $5 each using the coupon codes. They're already attached to the links. You just need to click through to the links and those coupon codes will be automatically applied. Thank you very much for watching. Please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel and I will see you in the next video.